shouldn't feel like deprivation. It's about aligning your body, mind, and spirit so you feel clear, calm, and deeply connected to who you really are. Hi, and welcome to the You World Order Showcase podcast, where we feature life health transformational coaches and spiritual entrepreneurs stepping up to be the change they seek in the world. I'm your host, Jill Hart, the Coach's Alchemist, on a mission to help coaches and entrepreneurs amplify their voice, monetize their mission, and get visible. If you're ready to start attracting premium clients without chasing algorithms or hunting people down like a banshee on a mission, head on over to coachesalchemist.com and schedule your free client acquisition audit. It's the first step to building a business where your clients seek you out rather than you having to hunt them down. Today, we are chatting with Dr. Jonathan Glass, ND, MAC. Dr. Jonathan is a neuropathic doctor, Ayurvedic practitioner, and author of The Total Life Cleanse. For over 30 years, he's helped people restore balance through an integrative blend of Ayurveda, acupuncture, energy healing, and modern nutrition. His holistic approach teaches that true wellness begins with honoring your intuition, clearing toxins, and reconnecting with your divine essence. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. It's great to
Thank
have
you
you with
so
us.
much. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, what's the most significant thing, in your opinion, as individuals we can do to impact how the world is going?
It's a great question. I think the number one thing is to begin the process, if you haven't already started, of beginning to trust your own information, intuition, and common sense when it comes to the wellness of yourself and your loved ones and your family and your community. It's something that, although science is truly a wonderful thing, uh, that the religion of science can get us into trouble, which means that if we give away our power too much, then we lose our common sense, we lose our intuition, and we don't trust our gut knowing about what actually is beneficial for us and the world around us.
Outsourcing our power.
Yes. Yep. Outsourcing our power. Exactly. Exactly.
I'm a big proponent of taking personal responsibility for
Yes.
your life and well-being, starting with, you wake up in the morning, you have a choice. It can be a good day or a bad day.
Yep.
You get to decide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important.
And I think diet has a lot to do with this. The more that you can address what you're putting into your body, and it's more than just what you eat, what you're wearing, what you're listening to, what you're taking in through your eyes. It all plays into our general overall well-being.
And
And I know you focus on Ayurvedic practices. Can you talk to the audience and to me a little bit about how all that works together with, I know you focus on food a lot, but I think it's interconnected with all of these other parts of our beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. So Ayurveda is a system of medicine from India, many thousands of years old. Veda means knowledge. Ayur means life. So it's the knowledge of life. And it's a very broad perspective of the human being. It includes the body, the mind, the emotions, the intelligence, the intuition, and the spirit itself. And that's the whole person. So the medicinal system looks at each person from that perspective and as an individual. So it's a very unique way of approaching it. Ayurveda includes even surgery. So it's not a sort of a new age, fluffy kind of system. It includes so many things: diet, nutrition, herbs, medicines, some very strong medicines if necessary. So it's not that it's just a weak system that's only meant to be used for healthy people. It can be used when people are very, very ill as well. So it's a very broad but it takes into consideration the whole human being. And you really touched on something really powerful, because in Ayurveda, everything is about digestion. So if you're digesting your food well, if you're digesting the sensory input through your eyes, through your ears, through your nose, through your mouth, through your skin even. So everything is about digestion, and the assault that comes through the eyes, the assault that comes through the ears in our modern culture and through the media is a lot to digest. And literally, from an Ayurvedic perspective and from my, personal experience for over 30 years now, is that it's really true. What we put in, whether it's through our mouth or through our senses, is very, very meaningful. And through our intellect, through our minds, what are we reading? What are we hearing? What are we allowing into our consciousness? What are we, contemplating in our day-to-day activities? What are we thinking about? It's so important. And when we take in junk on any of those levels, we still have to digest it. And if we take in too much junk or too many toxins on different levels, it starts to disturb not just the mental, emotional body, but ultimately the physical body, or the other direction. It'll disturb the physical body, which will then, have its impact on the mental body, on the mind, on the intellect, on our intuition and how we feel. So it's very, very important to approach it from all angles.
And we have amazing vehicles, which we call bodies,
Yeah,
for detoxifying. I mean,
yeah,
we didn't come here to live in, those bubbles that would protect you from everything. We came here to interact with nature and the realm that we're living at. And when we start adding in artificial toxins, it can sometimes overload us in a way that we weren't really designed to handle.
yeah,
And um, I'd like to explore how what you do to help people helps them get that under control.
yeah. It's a great question. I mean, even in these ancient systems of medicine, thousands of years old, said that the cause of all disease was toxin. And that was when the water was clean, the air was clean. But even then, because even if we eat the healthiest food in the world, but we're, running from a tiger in the jungle at the same time, we're not going to digest it very well, and that's going to break down, and undigested proteins will leak into the bloodstream, and that'll cause inflammation. So a lot of us are in a chronic inflammatory state due to what we're eating and the stress levels, and that's one reason why we have chronic disease, because some of these toxins are getting into the bloodstream, and if we do it every day, then it causes a problem. So the first thing I like to do is try to identify what are those foods. I like to start from the bottom up generally. What are the foods that people are eating on a regular basis that are causing trouble? In the modern day, the biggies are generally going to be wheat, dairy, sugar. And then, of course, we have alcohol, we have pesticides, herbicides. There's over 80,000 chemicals in the modern environment. Only 20,000 have ever been tested for human safety, and none of them have ever been tested synergistically. And even an infant from a mother that eats pretty healthy will have hundreds of toxins in their umbilical cord at birth, what to
Yeah.
mention. And then we're giving them,
Mercury,
mercury,
right
72
away,
different shots
aluminum.
throughout their life, so many things, and so many medications and things like that. So we're exposed to a lot of toxins that really never before in human history has a human body been exposed to. And it's a lot for the liver to deal with. It's a lot for
And
the
the
liver.
plastics.
And the
It's like
plastics, yes. Yep.
I
Plastic.
remember when they went from paper bags or save the forests. That was their
Yeah.
big campaign. Use plastic.
Yeah. Right. Right. Better would
What
have been
were
better
they
just to throw the
thinking?
paper out.
Yeah, at least it biodegraded.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. My sister right now, as a scientist, is working on a project of removing toxic chemicals from plastics, in the hope that, okay, we're going to still use plastic, but maybe we can make it less toxic for the world. So yeah. So yeah, we're exposed to so many things. And so to start with that, and then through kinesiology, which is a form of muscle testing, or at times there's some really good, blood, urine, saliva tests, stool analysis, which can really indicate what's going on in the body and identify some of those toxins that we're dealing with. And then there's different nutrients that we can use to help eliminate them. And also, for example, a very simple example, someone comes in with GERD or acid reflux, and if I don't ask them how they eat, not just what they eat, then if they're eating 90 miles an hour, at lunch break, then it makes sense that they will develop digestive issues. It's just like the analogy, same as eating the healthiest broccoli on the planet, but running from a tiger in the jungle, you're not going to digest it very well. And that will turn into, in Ayurveda, it's called ama, or a toxin. So, eating mindfully, making some dietary lifestyle shifts, eating as clean as possible. Being mindful that I think we've all been duped, at least I was growing up, that what you put in your body really didn't matter much. Because you kind of trusted the authorities that were putting chemicals and all kinds of crazy ingredients in our food. And yeah, on day one, it's not going to have much impact, but year 5, year 10, year 20, things start accumulating. But the other thing is that even on day one, sometimes people notice that, okay, I ate like crap yesterday. My mood is low today. I may not be having digestive issues, it's possible, but my mood is low. My energy is low. I'm a little foggy headed. And they may not, equate that with what they put in their body the day before or what they've been putting in their body for the last 10 years. That they're, even their depression, their low mood, their, different, even mental, emotional issues can be correlated sometimes to just how we take care of ourselves.
And I think people have been raised in the last, I'm gonna say like 40 years to just you start kids out with sugar addictions and milk addictions
Right.
that are like milk isn't really milk. I'm
Right.
sorry. You buy it from the store, it's been pasteurized. The
Right.
best of my knowledge, when you pasteurize something, you pretty much tear it apart and stick it back together.
Right.
And anything that was living and might be beneficial to you is long gone. So
Yeah.
it's and then we have the whey protein movement, which is just like a genius marketing ploy because whey is the byproduct of making cheese, and they were just throwing it out. Now they spray it on these big dehydrators and dehydrate it down and capture the residue and sell it
Right.
as protein powder. Just like, do we do we ever wonder about like how some of this stuff gets into our food supply?
I know. I know. It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. So, coming back to basics, eating real food, just getting as real and eating as clean, organic. Even in the organic world, there's different degrees of real organic. I always tell people if you can find a local farm and even talk to them about, what they're using on their crops. And there's even some local farms that may not be certified organic, but they're more organic than excuse me, a big organic farm somewhere.
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of things you can do inside. Like I love those drinks. I live in a community where it gets dark in the winter, so I like to do microgreens inside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Beautiful.
I love sunflower seeds and I love peas.
Mm.
Um, it, and it doesn't matter what quality the thing is. Like sometimes I will buy bird seed sunflower seeds,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and they're definitely not for human consumption, but they're plantable and they will grow a
Yeah.
plant, and a plant is a plant. And
Yeah.
I know what the soil is, so those are really super nutritious,
Absolutely.
especially when you're getting them young, because that's where all the super growth
Yes.
stuff happens, and so they
Mm-hmm.
haven't grown into a big plant yet. So that's just something is super simple that you can get some really good nutrient
Yeah.
bang for your buck. And it feels good
Absolutely.
to like know that you've grown it.
Yeah.
And same with like the meat. You can go
Mm-hmm.
to farms and find uh people that are selling the animals that they're butchering themselves, and like
Yeah.
we have people that have been raising chickens and we watched them all summer, and I can go over there and buy chickens from them in their little hut.
Yeah. It's a very different reality, very different quality. The animals are better taken care of, and yeah,
Meat tastes different,
it
way
does.
different
Yeah.
than when
Yeah.
you
I
get them in
remember
the
I
store.
had a guy here, a client of mine who, uh, he wanted to trade me meat for for acupuncture, and I happen to be a vegetarian, but as well. But he said, but my meat doesn't turn purple, and I said, this was years ago. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, most of the commercial meat turns purple because of the adrenaline that are in the cows, in those big factories, where my cows are very happy. They don't go into fear, and yes, they're slaughtered, but it's done very, very differently. The whole energy is very different. There's not the terror in those animals, the chemistry that goes into those animals, in the same way as,
Yep.
as dairy. If you're having dairy from a farm. I mean, I lived in a farm once. You could call the names of the cows, and they would come trotting to you, and you could start, milking them if you wanted to, right on the spot, because they were happy to do that, as opposed to being, animals that are terrorized and miserable, and all those chemicals of misery in their blood goes into their milk also. So it's a whole
Yeah.
different world. Yeah. Yep.
I had a dairy farm I lived on a homestead for a while.
What do you
So
do?
it's like we named our cows
Yeah.
and we took
Yeah.
them to the butcher and,
Yeah.
Norman's in the freezer. You know, it's just like a joke in our family. But um, yeah, it's a real thing. My kids
Yeah.
grew up on goat's milk because that
Yeah.
was what I could do. And I do I if I'm going to do dairy, I can go to a local dairy and get unpasteurized. The cows,
Wonderful.
I watched them give birth over the summer, and
Yeah.
it's like there's a natural process to getting
Yes.
milk, and we're probably the only animals that actually drink the milk of other animals
Yep.
as adults. I mean, how weird is that?
Kind of weird. Yeah. It's done, like in Ayurveda, milk is used, but even that, it's never like cold milk. They always will add spices, and just because in India, people think they drink a ton of milk, but back in the day it was medicinal. They'd use milk in medicinal ways and therapeutic ways. And it wasn't like they were drinking big, 16-ounce glasses of milk every morning, before they ran out, like I did as a kid, you know. It's a very different reality. And I think as people become more aware of the importance of what we're putting in our body, makes a huge difference. And that it affects people not just physically, but mentally, energetically, emotionally. I think, what percentage of people could come off of or reduce their antidepressant medications just by eating cleaner and, eliminating the, ton of sugar and staying hydrated and moving their bodies a little bit, it can make a huge difference for people.
It really can. And sleep.
And sleep,
People don't
absolutely.
realize how much what they're taking in affects their ability to get a good night's sleep. And when you can't sleep well, your body just isn't going to function well because it's the time our body uses to, clean everything up and
Exactly.
straighten it all up and do the vacuuming and, all the things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, sleep is so important. And, with talking about toxins, we think of toxins as, chemicals and herbicides and pesticides, but there's light toxin. And
Mhm.
with phones now, we can be on phones and with the blue light, and it's, interrupts melatonin synthesis and secretion of melatonin, and people wonder why they can't sleep with their phone right next to their head, and they're on their phone till, they pass out. It impacts the hormones, everything like that. And I think phones are probably more addictive than heroin these days, and,
Yeah.
it's a problem. And part of it is literally that, how those things impact the cortisol, the different hormones in the body. It has a definite impact. And I just think that we as a culture have to rethink things. And just because we have the technology, like anything, like fire is a technology. So you can use a fire to burn something, a house down, or you could use it to warm up the house or to cook really good food. So it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, but how we use it, uh, I think we have to become more and more mindful of, and how it's impacting us.
Yeah, and things like microwaves and televisions in the front room that are on all the time.
Hmm.
Just like the things that people have just gotten accustomed to using without
Hmm.
really considering the impact and making a conscious decision about what the consequences are from that kind of exposure. over
Hmm.
periods of time. Like microwaves, when they first came out, they were great, and you could heat up leftovers really fast. My husband was a truck driver for a lot of years, and so it was really convenient for him to be able to eat better quality food because he had a microwave.
Hmm.
But the microwave does emit radiation, as do televisions, and then you've got the constant like programming that goes on with most TV,
Hmm.
before we got into the like streaming things.
Right.
But people would just turn on the news and let the news like run all
Purvey
day
the atmosphere.
long.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's like,
You have to tell clients sometimes you need to, don't watch the news 12 hours a day. Don't just turn it off, And people like in Ayurveda, the whole thing is about digestion, so all that information, all that data, all that, mostly negative, is just coming in, and we expect that we should be happy and peaceful and clear and vibrant, but we're taking in all this. It's like I describe it like it's like how can you be happy if you're eating junk food all day? So if we're taking in junk food through through media, through the internet, or whatever it may be, too often, too much, then it becomes like it's like you're eating junk food all day, and it does impact us definitely.
it's kind of like doom porn. Yeah, the
Yeah,
people that do get addicted to this
absolutely.
adrenaline
Right.
rush that they get from hearing about all the bad things that are happening, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you really, on a personal level, listening to all of the garbage that is getting thrown at you, it just it upsets your whole system, on
Right.
a cellular level. And
Right.
you know, and then if you add eating into it, because they like to run commercials that inspire you to go and eat things that you shouldn't be eating, and then you're not digesting them because your whole body is in a state of panic.
Right. It's true.
And people don't even recognize that they're in that they're in that state chronically.
Right.
It becomes the new normal for them to feel that way. And so when they're given an opportunity to be calm, like you go for a walk in the woods, and
Hmm.
you just have nature and the sounds, and it's very uncomfortable for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, the first 10 minutes of walking in nature can even be uncomfortable
Yeah,
after
that's what
being around that environment. Yeah. And then after a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes, then everything starts calming down and normalizing and regulating. And, I like that saying by Ralph Waldo Emerson, every walk is a good walk, you know, excuse me, just getting out
true
in
story.
nature, just walking out there and clearing the head. And yeah, I think a lot of it is about, reevaluating how we're using all this technology and, you know, letting us experience darkness and getting back into natural rhythms, getting into nature more often and eating more naturally. It's not complicated. It's just not always prepackaged,
Yeah.
and it the crazy thing is how impactful it can be and how helpful it can be for people's health in general and they're just how they feel. It can be almost like night and day. It doesn't have to be, you don't necessarily need the most expensive herb or supplement or, machine or technology or whatever. We have a lot of it at our fingertips. Just have to, reconnect to it.
It's there's something. I have a lot of fruit that grows in my yard,
Mm,
and there's something about being out there on a warm day and just picking it off the bush or the tree and enjoying it, or vegetables that you grow in your garden. Um, there's something that's very different about that experience as opposed to going to a store and getting it. And
mhm.
probably the next best thing is to find somebody local that you can experience their produce
Yep.
from. That we're as beings, we're designed to be more outside and with nature, not inside with electronics. and
Right.
fake light and in all its different forms.
Yeah.
So I know you help people. How does that look? Are you doing group coaching? Are you doing one-on-one? Do
I
people
do
come and
both.
see you?
Yeah, I do both. I have a busy day-to-day practice. I see people 5 days a week. I see a bunch of people every day. And I also do group coaching through the paradigm of the Total Life Cleanse, which is a program that I teach that guides people basically along these principles of eating really clean, avoiding the common food sensitivities that people have, and then, adding some herbs and good nutrients along the way to support healthy detoxification and elimination, and really adding in some of these lifestyle practices that we're talking about, and encouraging people to do a little bit of meditation, a little bit of breathing. Doesn't have to be overly fancy or complicated. Just to, remind ourselves that, taking a few minutes just to get quiet every day and collect ourselves, because most of the time our senses are always outside. Everything is looking out, 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 out. And in Ayurveda, there's something called prana, which means inward directed energy. And it's very healthy to just take a few minutes to just do a little scan inside yourself and hang out with yourself. And I say use your body as an antenna, or use your breath as an antenna to recollect everything. Because again, so much of the time is out there and we're taking information out there, but there's, oceans of information inside also. And that's how the great masters of the past in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, the Tibetan masters, nothing in Western medicine has ever proven anything that I know of that Ayurveda has said about health. So they were all very accurate, and they didn't have machines, they didn't have telescopes. They could assess diabetes, they could assess cancer, they could assess all kinds of, diseases or imbalances that, the non-serious ones too, that lead to more serious conditions very, very effectively without the use of all the technology that we have today. I'm not saying we shouldn't use the technology. The technology can be really cool, really good, really helpful. But we still want to have authority and take responsibility for our own health, so that if a doctor tells you, oh, you have high blood pressure, so you must go on this medication, well, there's a lot of things naturally that you can do prior necessarily to going on that medication. If it's life or death, then sometimes the medication is a great thing. But prior to that, there's so many things that we can do and take response. And the benefit is not only will we avoid a toxin, but if we learn a few things, that'll enhance the quality of our life and maybe even the duration of our life.
Yes, it all comes back to taking personal responsibility.
Yeah,
Every decision you make is going to have a consequence. And
absolutely.
you're as adults, you're free to make any choice you wish.
Right.
It's best if you think about the consequence of those choices. And I,
Mm.
when you talk about blood pressure medications, it's just like that drives me crazy because people get on blood pressure medications and then they think that, oh, I'm all done and I'm just going to stay on these forever. And they don't realize that each of those medications that you get on also has consequences in your body because your body's not designed. You're not having high blood pressure because you're lacking those chemicals in your body. You
Right.
have high blood pressure because something else is malfunctioning. And
Mm.
sometimes those blood pressure numbers are artificial numbers, not
Right.
done right,
Correct.
and so you're adding something to your body that you don't need, and you're not doing the other things that you could be doing to maybe mitigate some of the other things,
Right.
other choices you made along the way to get you
Right.
to the situation you're in.
Another big one, of course, is cholesterol medication. That's another biggie that there some studies indicate that it contributes to Alzheimer's disease. Different.
Brain is all cholesterol.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, but
Yeah. So, all these
give up
things are
soda.
there. Give up soda. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it bends your endothelial cells, sugar and soda in particular, and that's what clogs up your arteries. And
Yeah.
that's what the whole cholesterol argument, as far as I know, was about. Just like
Right.
the solution is simple, but the pharmaceutical companies and the Coca-Cola or soda pop companies aren't aren't about standing up there and saying, yeah, our products cause you harm.
Right. Right. Exactly. So yeah, it's coming
That's
back to
money.
base and common sense. There's a wonderful word in Ayurveda, which I love. It's pragya aparad. And that means pragya means knowledge, experience, common sense, intuition, that in that realm. Aparad is when we offend that, when we go against it. So we know we have common sense, or we just know that something is either good or not good for me, and we just ignore it for various reasons, or because science or somebody tells you, oh, there's no FDA approval to that, or there's no proof that that works, so therefore we can only go by what's so-called proven through all the gazillions of dollars they used in their research studies, usually done by the same company.
That's
And
profiting off of it.
profiting off of our illnesses. And, I think a healthy degree of I've had enough of that crap in my life. I want to start thinking for myself. And, no problem getting information from the doctors and the scientists. That's okay. That's good. The technology is, it's good. But when it comes down to it, like you said, take responsibility for your own health. And yeah, in my work, I do muscle testing, kinesiology, which is quite amazing actually, and can identify food sensitivities. And sometimes I'll use testing. I'll use microbiome testing or hormone testing, saliva hormone testing, things like that that can give good information. But usually, even the muscle testing gives me everything I need to do. And sometimes people like the external thing saying, oh, what you were saying is right. Okay, I really will, take that action, because they see it on a piece of paper. That's okay. But so then, trying to, change some dietary habits, maybe add some herbs or nutrients that support the body in the right direction, treating things upstream rather than downstream. Downstream is when you're just treating a symptom. The analogy we always hear is, if the engine light in the car is on, then, sometimes taking a drug or a pharmaceutical is a little bit like going in there and turning off the engine light, but you're not really, you're
In
not
the
treating it.
engine.
Yeah, you're not really helping the engine. You're just turning off the disturbance of the engine light. So, better to figure out what's going on in the engine and fix that, and then the engine light will go off automatically. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that analogy a lot. So how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. So probably the best way is healingessencecenter.com and or Jonathan Glass at healingessencecenter.com. And there
Perfect.
you can, find my Total Life Cleanse programs that are going on, and my book is there, which gives a ton of information about all the things we're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. This
Thank
has
you
been
so
a
much for
great
having me.
conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
To learn more about Dr. Jonathan Glass and to explore his Total Life Cleanse program, please visit healingessencecenter.com, and we'll be sure to put those links in the show notes below. Thank you for tuning in with us today to the You World Order Showcase podcast. If you're ready to amplify your voice, monetize your mission, and start attracting premium clients, your next step is simple. Head to thecoachesalchemist.com and schedule your free client acquisition audit. Be sure to join us for our next episode as we share what others are doing to raise the global frequency. And remember, change begins with you. You have all the power to change the world. Start today and get visible.